So we're back on the 71 GT, gonna put a motor in it. So we got that used engine all cleaned up, and we got his water pump on it, and got the transmission on it. He had an almost new clutch in this thing, so we just put that right back on, and we put his flywheel and backing plate on it from the other motor. Before we put that in, went ahead and put a new slave cylinder and hose in because they were looking pretty suspect, and it's never easier to do than when the engine's out, because with the starter in the way, it is a real pain in the butt to get to. So we just went ahead and did that while it was this far apart. So what I like to do is I just put one bolt in either mount for the moment until you get the transmission mount done, and then lift the back of the transmission up and bolt the cross member to the car, then come back up and finish these. So what I like to do is get the transmission mount here all mounted to the transmission while the transmission is sitting down on the cross member, and then jack that up to get these bolts in here. It's way easier to get these bolts in with it hanging down like this than with it up in position. So that's the way I always do it. Yet these still are fiddly, especially when you put new mounts on, which we did, because one of his mounts was in two pieces and the other one was just mush, which is about how they usually are when they're original mounts like these appear to be. So we're plugging away on getting all this stuff put back on the motor here. And no, I'm not showing all of that stuff because I've already done that a number of times on the channel. So I'm not going to bore you with just that over and over and over again. But we got the manifold on, intake, carbs set in place. Still got to hook up the cables and all that stuff. And Keegan over here, the owner of the car, which you've already seen him on the channel before, with the old 74, he's cleaning off his exhaust pipes there to put new gaskets on. I had to replace one stud here on the manifold that broke off taking it apart. And we're gonna keep plugging along here. Now, one issue we do have with this being a 67 engine is this has generator mounts on it, not alternator mounts, and these two pads here are too far apart to drill and tap them to put the original mount back on. But that's not a problem because Moss sells this, which this is actually nothing more than just the alternator mount off of a midget with an A-series engine in it, because on the A-series they never actually moved and changed the mounts there. They just put this bracket on here. Of course, now we got to stack these and put a bolt through the longer bolts in there because this has the electric sending unit on it. But that's not a problem. Just a little bit of a correction on the alternator mount brackets. In my mind, I was thinking that that was spaced correctly, but then I picked up the wrong bracket, and when I held it up to the engine, I confused myself as to what was going on. Those two mounting locations on the motor will work if you drill and tap them out for this, but we opted to just go ahead and use the other bracket because it was a lot easier. Now, I've talked about order of assembly before, like on the MGA videos. Now we're going to go ahead and mount all this up here and bolt all that in, but we're not going to hook up the oil line yet, because once we get the core support in place, we bring the oil line for the oil cooler over here. It's much easier to tighten this down without this line in the way. But then when you go to put this line here, it's much easier to swing the wrench without the distributor in the way, which is why we don't have a distributor in it yet. And then we'll put the distributor in after those two are both in and tightened down. So one other little thing that we're going to be correcting here today is, you see how somebody has changed this alternator somewhere in the past. It's a rebuilt Bosch unit, and it's not the 5-terminal that was originally on these cars, which is no big problem changing them over. But see how long this bolt is here. Actually, this should be threaded, but sometimes the rebuilt ones aren't. But you don't want to bolt anywhere near this long sticking out here, because if you do, when you go to try to adjust this, this bolt hits on the motor mount, and then you can't hardly adjust this at all. You can't get that to go down and actually get the adjustment on the belt to put the belt on. So we're going to throw a shorter bolt in here so that it clears all that and make it a lot easier to play with this car in the future. For those of you that caught my short I put up about the wobble in the rear of the car, that was this car. Now I want to show you here, this thing's been sitting here for, I don't know, a week and a half, something like that, 2 weeks, whatever it was, since I did that video. And now look at how much worse it's gotten already. So when you get a lump like that in the tire, you do not want to wait. You need to get that taken care of right away, especially if you're driving the car. All right, so we got an exhaust system on it, got the radiator in it, and what we did here, we ended up putting aluminum radiator in that I had lying around since his radiator was in pretty bad condition. So everyone at home say, ooh, shiny. So we ended up moving the distributor drive gear 1 tooth, which is why I was having so much trouble part of why I was having trouble getting that thing running on the floor. And so I've got the carb set to a rough tune, a baseline tune. So now we just need to get it started up, and then I'm going to have to tune the carbs. So let's go ahead and start it up. All right, doesn't sound like it's running quite on all 4 cylinders, so I'll have to check, make sure we're getting fuel in both float bowls first, and make sure one of those spark plugs we threw in there, which are all okay, you know, make sure we're getting spark on all 4 cylinders, and then I can tune it. All right, so I found out we had no fuel in the front carb, so neither of the front 2 cylinders were firing. So let's try it again. All right, well, that's close enough now that we can go ahead and get it up in the air and time it, because this is the one time marks on the bottom. And I go through a quick valve adjustment, make sure everything looks good there before we go any further in the tuning. So I didn't get any more footage of finishing the car up. It was a bit chaotic around the shop when we were trying to finish it up, and we were having a problem with it not running right, and I just didn't get any footage. So being a 17-year-old, he was really anxious to get back in the car because he hadn't driven it in like 3 weeks or so. And while I was trying to tune it, I kept finding what seemed like an ignition miss in it. But I knew everything in the ignition system was good before, and number one cylinder wasn't firing. And I swapping spark plugs around, playing with distributor caps, things like that. And then finally I decided, well, let's just swap some plugs. Take number one plug, put it number two and number one, and see if the miss swaps to number two cylinder. Now, when we were putting this thing together, I had Keegan doing a lot of the little stuff. He put the spark plugs in, he put the water pump on, did the valve cover gasket, you know, stuff like that. It turns out during the chaos with me, actually before that, I had a lot of things going at once when I was having him do some of that stuff, and I forgot to make sure that he gapped the plugs when he put them in. And it turns out the number one plug come out of the box with almost a non-existent gap. So number one spark plug was only firing intermittently. And so we sorted that out. Now it runs great. Other than a minor noise in the engine, which I figure is probably why the engine had come out of a car years ago in the first place. It was running great. Oil pressure is great. Decent power, everything else. So I just warned him to not drive it too hard, so he doesn't like kick a rod out the side of it or something until we can build him that new motor. So anyway, as always, if you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe, share with your friends. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to notify, so you get notified when new videos come out. So this is MG Rob. Later.